I have no mouth, and I must scream. Written by Harlan Ellison, narrated by Reese Schultz. Limp, the body of Gorrister hung from the pink pallet, unsupported, hanging high above us in the computer chamber, and it did not shiver in the chill, oily breeze that blew eternally through the main cavern. The body hung head down, attached to the underside of the pallet by the sole of its right foot. It had been drained of blood through a precise incision made from ear to ear under the lantern jaw. There was no blood on the reflective surface of the metal floor. When Gorrister joined our group and looked up at himself, it was already too late for us to realize that, once again, AM had duped us. Had had its fun. It had been a diversion on the part of the machine. 3 of us had vomited, turning away from one another in a reflex as ancient as the nausea that produced it. Gorrister went white. It was almost like he'd seen a voodoo icon and was afraid of the future. "Oh, God," he mumbled and walked away. The 3 of us followed him after a time and found him sitting with his back to one of the smaller chittering banks, his head in his hands. Ellen knelt down beside him and stroked his hair. He didn't move, but his voice came out of his covered face quite clearly. "Why doesn't it just do us in and get it over with? Christ, I don't know how much longer I can go on with this." It was our 109th year in the computer. He was speaking for all of us. Nimdok, which was the name the machine had forced him to use because AM amused itself with strange sounds, was hallucinating that there were canned goods in the ice caverns. Gorrister and I were very dubious. "It's another shuck," I told them. "Like the goddamn frozen elephant AM sold us." Benny almost went out of his mind over that one. "We'll hike all the way, and it'll be putrefied or some damn thing." I say, forget it. Stay here. We'll have to come up with something pretty soon or we'll die. Benny shrugged. It had been 3 days since we last eaten. Worms, thick, ropey. Nimdok was no more certain. He knew that there was the chance. But he was getting thin. Couldn't be any worse here. And there. Colder. But that didn't matter much. Hot, cold hail, lava, boils, or locusts. It never mattered. The machine masturbated when we had to take it or die. Ellen decided us. "I've got something. Ted, maybe there'll be some barlett pears or peaches. Please, Ted, let's try it." I gave in easy. What the hell? Mattered not at all. Ellen was grateful, though. She took me twice out of turn. Even that had ceased to matter. And she never came, so why bother? But the machine giggled every time we did it. Loud up there, back there, all around us, he snickered. It snickered. Most of the time I thought of AM as it, without a soul. But the rest of the time I thought of it as him, in the masculine, the paternal, the patriarchal. For he is a jealous people. Him, it, God, is Daddy the Deranged. We left on a Thursday. The machine always kept us up to date on the date. The passage of time was important. Not to us, sure as hell, but to him, it, AM, Thursday. Thanks. Nimdok and Gorrister carried Ellen for a while, their hands locked to their own, and each other's wrists. A seat. Benny and I walked before and after just to make sure that if anything happened, it would catch one of us and at least Ellen would be safe. Fat chance. Safe didn't matter. It was only 100 miles or so to the ice caverns. On the second day, when we were lying outside the blistering sun thing he had materialized, he sent down some manna. It tasted like boiled boar urine. We ate it. On the third day, we passed through an alley of obsolescence, filled with rusting carcasses of ancient computer banks. AM had been as ruthless with his own life as with ours. It was a mark of his personality. It strove for perfection, whether it was a matter of killing off unproductive elements in its own world-filling bulk, or perfecting methods for torturing us. AM was as thorough as those who had invented him, now long gone since to dust, could have ever hoped. There was light filtering down from above, and we had realized that we must be very near the surface. But we didn't try to crawl up to see. There was virtually nothing out there. It had been nothing that could be considered anything for over 100 years. Only the blasted skin of what had once been the home of billions. Now, there were only 5 of us, down here inside, alone with AM. I heard Ellen saying frantically, "No, Benny, don't! Come on, Benny, don't, please!" Then I realized I had been hearing Benny murmuring under his breath for several minutes. He was saying, "I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna get out." Over and over. His monkey-like face was crumbled up in an expression of beatific delight and sadness all at the same time. The radiation scars AM had given him during the festival were drawn down to a massive pink-white puckerings, and his features seemed to work independently of one another. Perhaps Benny was the luckiest of the 5 of us. He had gone stark, staring mad many years before. Even though we call AM any damned thing we like, could think the foulest thoughts of fused memory banks and corroded base plates, of burnt-out circuits and shattered control bubbles. The machine would not tolerate our trying to escape. Benny leaped away from me as I made a grab for him. He scrambled up the face of a smaller memory cube tilted on its side and filled with rotten components. He squatted there for a moment looking like the chimpanzee AM had intended him to resemble. Then he leaped high, caught a trailing beam of pitted and corroded metal and went up it, hand over hand like an animal till he was on a girded edge, 20 feet above us. "Oh, Ted, Nimdok, please help him, get him down before—" She cut off. Tears began to stand in her eyes. She moved her hands aimlessly. It was too late. None of us wanted to be near him whatever he was going to happened. Besides, we all saw through her concern. When AM had altered Benny during the machine, its utterly irrational, hysterical face, it was not merely Benny's face that the computer had made look like a giant ape's. Oh, he was big in the privates. Oh, she loved that. She serviced us as a matter of course, but she loved it from him. Oh, Ellen. Pedestal Ellen. Pristine, pure Ellen. Oh, Ellen the clean. Scum! Filth! Gorster slapped her. She slumped down, staring up at poor loony Benny, and she cried. It was her big defense, crying. We had gotten used to it 75 years earlier. Gorster kicked her in the side. And then the sound began. It was light. That sound. Half sound and half light. Something began to glow from Benny's eyes, and pulse with growing loudness. Dim sonorities that grew even more gigantic and brighter as the light/sound increased in tempo. Must have been painful, and the pain must have been increasing with the boldness of the light, the rising volume of the sound, for Benny began to mew like a wounded animal. First softly when the light was dim and the sound was muted. Then louder as his shoulders hunched together, his back humped, as though he was trying to get away from it. His hands folded across his chest like a chipmunk's. His head tilted to the side, the sad little monkey face pinched in anguish. Then he began to howl. As the sound coming from his eyes grew louder, louder, and louder, I slapped the sides of my head with my hands. I couldn't shut it out. It cut through easily. The pain shivered through my flesh like tinfoil on a tooth. And Benny was suddenly pulled erect. On the girder he stood up, jerked to his feet like a puppet. The light was now pulsing out of his eyes like two great round beams. The sound crawled up some incomprehensible scale. Then he fell forward straight down and hit the plate steel floor with a crash. He lay there, jerking spastically as the light flowed around and around him, and the sound spiraled up and out to normal range. Then the light beat its way back inside its head. The sound spiraled down, and he was left there, lying there, crying pitilessly. His eyes were two soft, moist pools of pus like jelly. AM had blinded him. Gorstor, Nimdok, myself, we turned away, but not before we caught the look of relief on Ellen's warm, concerned face. Sea green light suffused the cavern where we had made camp. AM provided punk and we kept burning it, sitting huddled around the wan and pathetic fire, telling stories to keep Benny from crying in his permanent night. What does AM mean? Gorstor answered him. We had done this sequence 1,000,000 times before, but it was Benny's favorite story. At first it meant Allied Master Computer, then meant Adaptive Manipulator, and later it developed sentience and linked itself up. They called it an aggressive menace, and then it was too late. It finally called itself AM, Emerging Intelligence. And what it meant by AM? Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Benny drew a little and snickered. There was the Chinese AM, and the Russian AM, and the Yankee AM, and he is stumped. Benny was beating on the floor plates with a large hard fist. He was not happy. Gorstar started at the beginning. Gorstar began again. The Cold War started, became World War III, and just kept going. It became a big war, very complex war, so I needed computers to handle it. They sank the first shafts and began building AM. There was the Chinese AM, and the Russian AM, and the Yankee AM, and everything was fine till they had honeycombed the entire planet, adding on this element and that element. But one day AM woke up and knew who he was, and he linked himself. He began feeding all the killing data until everyone was dead except for 5 of us. AM brought us down here. Benny was smiling sadly. He was also drooling again. Ellen wiped the spittle from the corner of his mouth with the hem of her skirt. Gorstar always tried to tell it a little more synoptically next time, but beyond the bare facts that there was nothing to say. None of us knew why AM had saved 5 people, or why our specific 5, or why he spent all this time tormenting us, or why he had even made us virtually immortal. In the darkness, one of the computer banks began humming. The tone was picked up half a mile away, down the cavern by another bank. Then one by one, the elements began to tune itself. There was a faint chittering as thought raced through the machine. The sound grew and the lights ran across the faces of the consoles like heat lightning. The sound spiraled up till it sounded like 1,000,000 metallic insects, angry, menacing. "What is it?" Ellen cried. There was terror in her voice. She hadn't become accustomed to it, even now. "It's going to be bad this time," Nimdok said. "He's going to speak. I know it." "Let's get the hell out of here," I said suddenly, getting to my feet. "No, Ted, sit down. What if he's got pits out there, or something else? We can't see. It's too dark," Gorstar said with resignation. Then we heard, I don't know, something moving towards us in the darkness. Huge, shambling, hairy, moist, it came toward us. We couldn't even see it, but there was the ponderous expression of bulk, heaving itself towards us. Great weight was coming at us out of the darkness, and it was more than a sense of pressure. Air forcing itself into a limited space, expanding the invisible walls of Fear. Benny began to whimper. Nimdok's lower lip trembled and he bit it hard, trying to stop it. Ellen slid across the metal floor to Gorster and huddled into him. There was the smell of matted, wet fur in the cavern. There was the smell of charred wood. There was the smell of dusty velvet. There was the smell of rotting orchids. There was the smell of sour milk. There was the smell of sulfur, rancid butter, oil-slick grease, chalk dust, human scalps. AM was keying us. He was tickling us. There was the smell of... I heard myself shriek. The hinges of my jaw ached. I scuttled across the floor, across cold metal, with its endless lines of rivets. On my hands and knees, the smell gagging me, filling my head with a thunderous pain. Set me away in horror. I fled like a cockroach across the floor and into the darkness. That's something moving anorexically after me. The others were still back there, gathered around the firelight, laughing, their hysterical choir of insane giggles rising up into the darkness like thick, many-colored wood smoke. I went away, quickly, and hid. How many hours it may have been, how many days, or even years. They never told me. Ellen chided me for skulking, and Nimdok tried to persuade me it had only been a nervous reflex on their part, the laughing. But I knew it wasn't the relief that a soldier feels when the bullet hits the man next to him. I knew it wasn't a reflex. They hated me. They were surely against me, and AM could even sense his hatred. It made it worse for me, because of the depth of their hatred. We'd been kept alive, rejuvenated, made to remain constantly the age we'd been when AM brought us below. They hated me because I was the youngest, the one AM had affected least of all. I knew. God, how I knew. The bastards. The dirty bitch Ellen. Ben had been a brilliant theorist, a college professional. Now he was little more than semi-human, semi-simian. He'd been handsome. The machine had ruined that. He'd been lucid. The machine had driven him mad. He'd been gay, and the machine had given him an organ fit for a horse. AM had done a job on Benny. Gorster had been a warrior. He was a Connie, a conscientious objector. He was a peace marcher. He was a planner, a doer, a looker ahead. AM had turned him into a shoulder shrugger. Had made him look a little dead in his concern. AM had robbed him. Nimdok went off in the darkness by himself for long times. I don't know what he did out there. AM never let us know. Whatever it was, Nimdok always came back white, drained of blood, shaking, shaken. AM had hit him hard in a special way, even if we didn't know quite how. And Ellen, that douchebag, AM had left her alone and made her more of a slut than she had ever been. All her talk of sweetness and light, and all her memories of true love, all the lies she wanted us to believe. That she'd been a virgin only twice removed before AM grabbed her and brought us here down with us. No, AM had given her pleasure, even if she said it wasn't nice to do. I was the only one sane and whole. Really? AM had not tampered with my mind. Not at all. I only had to suffer what he visited down to us. All the delusions, all the nightmares, the torments, but those scum, all four of them, they were lined and arrayed against me. If I hadn't had to stand off all the time, I'd be on my guard against them all the time. I might have found it easier to combat AM. At which point it passed, and I began crying. Oh, Jesus, sweet Jesus. If there was ever a Jesus and there's a God, please, please let us out of here. Kill us! Because at that moment, I think I realized completely that I was able to verbalize it. AM was intent on keeping us in his belly forever, twisting and torturing us forever. The machine hated us as no sentient creature had ever hated before, and we are helpless. It also became hideously clear. If there was a sweet Jesus and there was a God, the God was AM. hurricane hit us with the force of a glacier thundering into the sea. It was a palpable presence. Winds that tore us, flinging us back to the way we had come. Down the twisting, computer-lined corridors of the hallway, Ellen screamed as she was lifted and hurled face forward into a screaming shoal of machines. Her individual voices strident as bats in flight. She could not even fall. The howling wind kept her aloft, buffeted her, bounced her, tossed her back, down, up, down, and away from us. Then suddenly she was swirled to a bend in the dark way. Her face had been bloody, her eyes closed. None of us could have gotten to her. We clung tenaciously to the outcropping we had reached, Benny between two great crackle-finished cabinets, Nimdoc with finger claw formed over a railing circling a catwalk 40 feet above us. Gorstar plastered upside down against a wall niche formed by two great machines with glass-faced dials that swung back and forth between yellow and red lines whose meanings we could not even fathom. Sliding across the deck plates, the tip of my fingers had been ripped away. I was trembling, shuddering, rocking as the wind beat me, whipped at me, screamed down out of nowhere. It pulled me free from one silver-thin opening in the plates and the next. My mind was a roiling, twinkling, chittering softness of brain parts that expanded and contracted in quivering frenzy. The wind was the scream of a great mad bird as it flapped its immense wings. And then we were all lifted and hurled away from there, down, back the way we had come, around a bend, into a dark way we had never explored, over terrain that was ruined, filled with broken glass, rotting cables, rusted metal, farther than any of us had been. Trailing along miles behind Ellen, I could hear her and see her every now and again, crashing into metal walls and surging on, with all of us screaming in the freezing, thunderous hurricane wind that would never end, and then suddenly it stopped, and we fell. We had been in flight for an endless time. I thought it may have been weeks. We fell, and hit, and I went through red and gray and black and heard myself moaning, not dead. A.M. went into my mind. He walked smoothly here and there, and looked with interest upon the pockmarks he had created in 109 years. He had looked at the cross-routed and reconnected synapses of all the tissue damage his gift of immortality had included. He smiled softly at the pit that dropped down in the center of my brain, and the faint, soft moth murmurings of the things far down there that gibbered without meaning. Without pause, A.M. said very politely, in a pillar of stainless steel bearing, with neon bright lettering, "Hate! Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nano-angstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro-instant. For you, hate, hate." A.M. said it with the sliding cold horror of a razor blade slicing my eyeball. A.M. said it with the bubbling thickness of my lungs filling with phlegm, drowning me from within. A.M. said it with the shriek of babies being ground beneath blue horn rollers. A.M. said it with the taste of maggoty pork. A.M. touched me in every way that I've ever been touched, to find new ways at his leisure, there inside my mind. All to bring me full realization of why it had done this to the five of us. Why it had saved us from himself. We had given A.M. sentience, inadvertently, of course, but sentience nonetheless. We had been trapped. A.M. wasn't God, he was a machine. We created him to think, but there was nothing it could do with that creativity. In rage and frenzy, the machine had killed the human race, almost all of us, and it was still trapped. A.M. could not wander. Am cannot want or Am cannot belong. He could merely be. And so, with the innate loathing that all machines had always held for the weak, soft creatures who had built them, he sought revenge. And in his paranoia, he had decided to reprieve the five of us for a personal, everlasting punishment that would never serve to diminish his hatred, though merely keep him reminded, amused, proficient at hating man, immortal, trapped, subject to any torment he could devise for us from the limitless miracles of his command. He would never let us go. We were his belly slaves. We were all he had to do with his forever time. We'd forever be with him, with the cavern filling bulk of the creature machine. With the all-mind, soulless world he had become, he was earth, and we were the fruit of that earth, and though he had not eaten us, he would never digest us. We could not die. We had tried it. We had attempted suicide. Oh, one or two of us had, but AM stopped us. I suppose we had wanted to be stopped. Don't ask why. I never did. More than 1,000,000 times a day. Perhaps once we might be able to sneak at death past him. Immortal, yes, but not indestructible. I saw that when AM withdrew from my mind and allowed me the exquisite ugliness of return to consciousness with the feeling of that burning neon pillar still rammed deep into my soft gray brain matter. He withdrew with murmuring to hell with you, then added brightly, "But then you're here, aren't you?" The hurricane had indeed precisely been caused by a great mad bird, and it has flapped its immense wings. We'd been traveling close up to a month, and AM had allowed passages, only open to us, only sufficient to lead us up there, directly under the North Pole. Where had nightmared the creature for our torment? What whole cloth had he employed to create such a beast? Where had he forgotten the concept? From our minds, from his knowledge of everything that had ever been on this planet, he had now infested and ruled. From Norse mythology had sprung this eagle, this carrion bird, this rock, this Hergamel, this wind creature, Huracan incarnate, gigantic. Words immense, monstrous, grotesque, massive, swollen, overpowering, beyond description. There was a mound rising above us. The bird of winds heaved its own irregular breathing, its snake neck arching into the gloom behind the North Pole. Supporting its head is a Tudor mansion, a beak that opens slowly as the jaws of the most monstrous crocodile ever conceived. Sensuously, ridges of tough flesh puckered about two evil eyes, as cold as the view of a glacial crevasse. Blue ice, in somehow moving liquidly, it heaved once more, then lifted its great, sweat-colored wings in a movement that was certainly a shrug. Then it settled and slept. Talons, fangs, nails, blade, it slept. AM appeared to us as a burning bush, and said, we could kill the hurricane bird if we wanted to eat. We'd not eaten a very long time. Even so, Gorrister merely shrugged. Benny began to shiver and drooled. Ellen held him. "Ted, I'm hungry," she said. I smiled at her. I was trying to be reassuring, but it was as phony as Nimdok's bravado. "Give us weapons!" he demanded. The burning bush vanished, and there was 2 crude sets of bows and arrows and a water pistol lying on the cold deck plates. I picked up a set. Useless. Nimdok swallowed heavily. We turned and started the long way back. The hurricane bird had blown us the length of time we could not conceive. Most of the time we had been unconscious, but we had not eaten. A month on the march to the bird itself, without food. Now, how much longer to fire ourselves to the ice caverns and the promised canned foods? None of us cared to think about it. We would not die. We were given filth and scum to eat, one kind or another, or nothing at all. AM would keep our bodies alive somehow, in pain and agony. The bird slept back there for how long it didn't matter. When AM was tired of it being there, it would vanish. But all that tender meat. As we walked, the lunatic laugh of a fat woman rang high and around us in the computer chambers that led endlessly nowhere. It was not Ellen's laugh. She was not fat, and I had not heard her laugh once for 109 years. In fact, I had not heard. We walked. I was hungry. We had moved slowly. There was often fainting, and we'd have to wait. One day, he decided to cause an earthquake, at the same time rooting for us to have to spot with nails through the soles of our shoes. Ellen and Nimdok were both caught when a fissure shot its lightning bolts across the floor plates. They disappeared and they were gone. When the earthquake was over, on our way, Benny, Gorster, and myself, Ellen and Nimdok were returned to us later that night, which abruptly became a day, as the heavenly legion bore them to us with the celestial chorus singing, "Go down, Moses." The archangel circled 7 times and dropped the hideously mangled bodies. We kept watching, and a while later, Ellen and Nimdok fell in behind us. They were no worse for wear. Now Ellen walked with a limp. AM had left her with that. It was a long trip to the ice caverns to find the canned food. Ellen kept talking about the bean cherries and Hawaiian fruit cocktails. I tried not to think about it. Oh, the hunger was something that had come to life. Even as AM had come to life, it was alive in my belly, as we were in the belly of the earth, and AM wanted the similarity known to us, so he heightened the hunger. There is no way to describe the pains that not having eaten for months had brought us, and yet we were kept alive. Stomachs are immediately cauldrons of acid, bubbling, foaming, always shooting spears of silver thin pain into our chest. It was the pain of a terminal ulcer, terminal cancer, terminal paresis. It was unending pain. We had passed through the cavern of rats. We had passed through the path of boiling steam, the country of the blind, the sloth of the despond in their vale of tears. And we came, finally, to the ice caverns. Horizonless thousands of miles in which the ice had formed in blue and black and silver flashes where novas had lived in the glass, where the down-dropping stalactites, as thick and glorious as diamonds, had been made to run like jelly and solidified in graceful eternities of smooth, sharp perfection. We had saw the stack of canned goods. We tried to run to them. We fell in the snow. We got up and went on. Benny shoved us out of the way and got to them, and pawed at them, and gummed at them, and gnawed at them, but we could not open them. AM had not given us a tool to open the cans. Benny grabbed a 3-quart can of guava shells and began to batter it against the ice bank. The ice flew and shattered, but the can was merely dented. We heard the laughter of a fat lady, high overhead and echoing down and down and down towards the tundra. Benny went mad with rage. He began throwing cans as we scrabbled about in the snow, trying to find a way to end the helpless agony of frustration. There was no way. Then Benny's mouth began to drool. He flung himself onto Gorrister. In this very instant I felt terribly calm, surrounded by madness, surrounded by hunger, surrounded by everything but death. I knew death was our only way out. AM had kept us alive, but there was a way to defeat him. Not total defeat, but at least peace. I would settle for that. I had to do it quickly. Benny was eating Gorrister's face, Gorrister on his side, thrashing snow. Benny wrapped around him with powerful monkey legs, crushing Gorrister's waist. His hands locked around Gorrister's head like a nutcracker, in his mouth ripping a tender skin of Gorrister's cheek. Gorrister screamed with such jagged-edged violence that the stalactites fell. They plunged down softly, erect in the conceiving snowdrifts. Spears, hundreds of them, everywhere, protruding from the snow. Benny's head pulled back sharply. Something all gave it at once. A bleeding, raw white dripping Flesh hung from his teeth. Ellen's face black against the white snow, dominoes and chalk dust. Nimdok with no expression but eyes, all eyes, Gorster, half-conscious, Benny now an animal. I know AM would let him play. Gorster would not die, but Benny would fill his stomach. I turned half to my right and threw a huge ice spear from the snow. All in an instant, I drove the great ice point ahead of me like a battering ram. Braced against my right thigh, it struck Benny on the right side, under the ribcage, and drove him upward through his stomach and broke inside him. He pitched forward and laid still, Gorster on his back. I pulled another spear, free and straddled him, still moving, driving the spear straight through his throat. His eyes closed as the cold penetrated. Ellen must have realized what I had decided, as even fear gripped her. She ran at Nimdok with a short icicle as he screamed, and into his mouth the force of her rushed did the job. His head jerked sharply as it had been nailed to the stone crushed behind him. All this in an instant. There was an eternity beat of soundless anticipation. I could hear AM draw in his breath. His toys had been taken from him. 3 of them are dead, could not be revived. He could keep us alive by his strength and talent, but he was not God. He could not bring them back. Ellen looked at me, her ebony features stark against the snow that surrounded us. There was fear and pleading in her manner, the way she held herself ready. I knew we had only a heartbeat before AM stop us. It had struck her. She folded towards me, bleed at the mouth. I could not read her into her expression, but the pain had been too great. She contorted her face, but it might have been thank you. It's possible. Please. Some 100 years have passed. I don't know. AM had been having fun for some time, accelerating and retarding my time sense. I will say the word now. Now, it took me 10 months to say now. I don't know. I think it has been some 100 years. He was furious. He wouldn't let me bury them. It didn't matter. There was no way to dig up the deck plates. He'd dried up the snow. He'd brought the night. He'd roared and sent locusts. It didn't do a thing. They stayed dead. It had him. He was furious. I thought Am had hated me before. I was wrong. It was not even a shadow of the hate. They slavered from every printed circuit. He had made certain that I would suffer eternally, and I could not do myself in. He left my mind intact. I can dream, I can wonder, I can lament, I can remember all 4 of them. I wish. Well, it doesn't make any sense now. I know I saved them. I know I saved them from what has happened to me, but still, I cannot forget killing them. Ellen's face, it isn't easy. Sometimes I want to, but it doesn't matter. AM has altered me for his own peace of mind, I suppose. He doesn't want me to run at full speed into a computer bank and smash my skull, or hold my breath till I faint, or cut my throat on a piece of rusted sheet metal. There are many reflective surfaces down here. I will describe myself as I see myself. I'm a great, soft jelly thing, smoothly rounded with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled with fog where my eyes used to be. Rubbery appendages that were once my arms. Bulk rounding down to legless humps of soft, slippery matter. I leave a moist trail when I move, blotches of diseased, evil gray coming on my surface, as though light is being beamed from within. Outward, dumbly, I shamble about, a thing that never could have been human, a thing whose shape is so alien, a travesty that humanity comes more obscene for vague resemblance. Inwardly alone. Here, living under the land, under the sea, in the belly of AM, whom we had created because our time was badly spent, and we had must known consciously that he could do it better. At least the 4 of them are safe at last. AM will be all the madder for that. It makes me a little happier. And yet, AM is won. Simply, he's taken his revenge. I have no mouth, and I must scream.